the campus of Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Our conversation today is on 3 federal government and DoD cloud transition issues and how to prevent them. My name is Eileen Rubel, and I'll be your moderator for today's conversation. I'd like to thank you in advance for attending. We want to make today as interactive as possible, so we address questions throughout the discussion. You can submit your questions to our staff at any time during the presentation by using the chat tab on the page interface. And now I'd like to introduce you to our 2 panelists for today. Tim Morrow is the Situational Awareness Technical Manager in the SCI's CERT Division's Monitoring and Response Directorate. Hi, Tim.
Hi, Eileen. Thank you very much.
And Dale Alleshouse is a software engineer with the SCI's Software Solutions Division. Hey, Dale.
Hi, Eileen.
Lastly, before we get started, we want to invite you all to attend our Software and Cyber Solutions Symposium in September on benefits and risks of cloud computing. That's held September 10th and 11th in Arlington, Virginia. This is a one-day symposium on Tuesday, September 10th, which is free to attendees, but we do ask that you register so that we know you're coming. Breakfast and morning beverages, lunch, and an afternoon snack are provided, and we also offer half-day tutorials which are free to government attendees on Wednesday, September 11th, and those are on related topics. Each tutorial does include 3 hours of instruction in the selected topic, plus lunch and refreshment breaks. Government employees should use the discount code GovMill, which is on the registration page, when registering for tutorials. And please note that there are 2 concurrent tutorials in the morning and afternoon sessions, so you'll only be able to register for one in each time slot. We'll email you more information about that event in our follow-up after this webinar. And now, before we get started, I'd like to ask Dale and Tim to just give us a little bit of background on their perspective on cloud computing and how they came to be with us today, and then we'll get started. Dale?
Hi. I've been writing software for a little over 25 years, and the last 10 years or so I've been really concentrating on cloud-native business applications. I came to the SEI a couple of years ago. It's been a little over 2 years now. To try to help share some of my cloud expertise with the DoD.
Great. And Tim, I know you and I have been at the SCI for about 16 years now?
Yes, been very fortunate at that. So I originally started here in the acquisition support program. It was really nice. The SCI took a different spin at things at the time that I came in to focus on acquisitions for DoD programs. Since then, I got to move to be the full life cycle, so I gravitated to doing architecture, specifically system of systems architecture, which I've been finding very handy in my new role in our CERT division, dealing with cybersecurity for cloud systems.
Okay, great. We are talking about, to remind the audience, we're talking about three areas of issues in DoD and federal programs and cloud migrations, and strategies and approaches to prevent them. And at a high level, what we're talking about today is getting a better appreciation of the planning needed to transition assets and capabilities to cloud environments. Important differences in implementing cybersecurity in cloud computing environments, and how an important part of successful cloud transitions really relies on providing appropriate training and tooling for an organization's IT staff. So to get us started, Dale, I know you and I have had a number of conversations over the last few years about this misperception that still exists that the cloud is a silver bullet, that we just put it to the cloud and we're going to get magic. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, a lot of people think that you can just reach into your data center, pull your application up by its shirt tails, create a VM in the cloud, and dump it in there, and suddenly I'm in the cloud. They've read about all these great marketing articles put out, by the big 3 cloud vendors about how you get auto elasticity, infinite scaling, high availability, and these all just come from being in the cloud. That's kind of true, but it's really not. It's kind of a little bit of an antiquated way of looking at the cloud. If you go back 10, 12 years, the way the cloud was defined at that point in time was your bits running on someone else's server, right? So it just meant you were running somewhere else. The cloud has evolved and moved so fast over the past 10 years. I pulled a definition for what the cloud is out of the book Building Evolutionary Architectures that I really like. It defines it as a variety of technologies that allow rapid provisioning of systems or services from a shared pool of resources. that's a pretty different definition.
Right.
This shared pool of resources really doesn't have to be running in AWS or Azure. These could be running on premise. These could be running anywhere. They could be a joint process of them. My favorite analogy I like to use for this is the cloud isn't a switch that you just turn on and you automatically have all of this stuff. That's it would be nice, but that's not reality. The reality is that the cloud and all of the benefits you get from it is very much a dial. And the way that you adjust that dial is with things like your architecture. You have to architect your app specifically to take advantage of this. So if you're going to transition to the cloud, there's nothing wrong with doing the standard lift and shift to get your app into the cloud initially, but you can't leave it there. That's when your real work begins, so you can actually take advantage of it. Otherwise, just running a VM in the cloud is likely to be more expensive than it is to run it on premise.
So what you're really talking about is taking a mindful, strategic approach to what are the benefits that you're really trying to achieve, and selectively and strategically employing those technologies in that combination of shared resources. So in other words, doing your due diligence.
Right.
Tim, I know you have some thoughts on due diligence in cloud migrations as well.
Right. I think a lot of this fell out of a number of agencies for following that cloud first policy that came out good 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. And they were just saying whatever new came up, you had to throw it in the cloud. And that didn't work very well. We had so many failure stories about email problems, people assuming that somebody's taking care of things for you. So we've identified a best practice is doing your due diligence in terms of considering your transition to the cloud. And we focus on 4 areas in that. There's the planning part, development and deployment, the operations, and decommissioning. So the planning part ties into the architecture part that Dale just talked about, but I think that's a very key part that I know Dale's going to expand upon here a little bit more.
So do you want to talk a little bit more to architecture now, or do you want to move on?
I'd love to. So when you think about architecture, what you really think about to get the full advantage of the cloud is you want loosely coupled components, right? So the reason that loosely coupled components didn't really work in the past was it was just too expensive to do it. Everything, the cost of an operating system and spinning up different apps, you couldn't really have independently deployable and independently testable components because the cost would have been astronomical.
Right.
The beauty of the cloud is that it allows you to do all these things. It takes your architectural quantum from this down to this. So now all of a sudden I have all of these new options available to me. And if I can take my architecture and reduce the quantum size to something that's very tractable, the world is my oyster at that point. Then that is when I actually get the advantage and all those benefits. I've turned that dial up.
So we do a lot of work with defense programs, and there's a lot of questions that swirl around about how it can be a lot easier to grok the idea of cloud migration in the context of enterprise systems or even command and control systems. But let's talk about embedded systems environments.
Yeah. That's something I actually particularly love to talk about because I recently did a embedded project last year at the SEI, and we used a bunch of cloud technologies. One thing people often forget is where your software is actually deployed is about this much of this, right? Your whole development process can take huge advantages by moving it to the cloud. You have things like source control servers, you have build pipelines, you have dev environments that can be automatically configured in the cloud. You can do things like run your embedded things in containerized environments that can also be tested in the cloud. I think it's really important to not couple where your app is going to eventually reside with the development and testing practices.
Right. So I think that's one thing. I think it would be helpful to get people to understand what we're talking about in architecture. So it's not just, a lot of people think about in cloud, they talk about the three models: infrastructure as code, platform as a code, software as a code. And the world's changed so much since then. When you start talking about containers and different things, microservices, there's so much more that you have to think about when you're architecting your system. So that's one thing that when we talk about architecture, we're talking about getting a very good context of what you're trying to do. Developing context diagrams, understanding your stakeholders, having multiple views of that architecture from their point of view, and being able to walk through things we call mission threads to go end to end, or your workflows, so that you can understand that vision, get that vision of what you want to build. That's key, because then you can figure out where things can go and work best.
Thanks. I do want to let all of our viewers know that as part of the tutorial scheduled for our Software and Cyber Solutions Symposium on September 11th, one of the fun things that we're going to do is, I know a lot of folks who are in program management and executive roles may not be bending code to actually execute a cloud migration strategy. But Dale and one of our colleagues are going to be delivering a hands-on cloud migration tutorial simulation for managers. It actually involves a hands-on approach to moving a simulated application into the cloud, and we're going to be applying using a dashboard to link the technical outcomes to business decisions. So please consider that in your planning for our Software and Cyber Solutions Symposium. And I do want to remind everyone that we are taking questions online via the chat tab on the interface. So let's take a moment now and move on to let's talk about cybersecurity. Tim, I know that your team does extensive work on risks, threats, and vulnerabilities. You've published a few papers this week, in fact. And so can you start by talking to us about how cybersecurity for cloud implementations is different from what we're used to historically from on-prem solutions?
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, we're very excited. We had a paper published last week and then today on vulnerabilities, threats, and risk to the cloud. And so we did a podcast and blogs on this last year too, but the papers coming out provide additional context to this, and I think it'll be helpful for people watching to this session today. But to build upon what you have to do for a cybersecurity point of view when you move to the cloud, I get those architectures just like Dale and I were talking about. You have to have that vision. You have to understand your workflows, what you're trying to do, and then be able to develop those workflows or mission threads to use them to walk through that vision and to get buy-in from all your stakeholders, because we're going to talk in a little bit about shared responsibility, which is very different than having all the responsibility on-premise environment. So I think those are the types of things that we find very helpful from a cybersecurity point of view, is to be able to walk through that system, have those stakeholders talk to you, and then figure out where my risks, where my vulnerabilities are. That's the big value add that we do when we work with programs here.
So I've spent the last few years really working in the Agile and defense community, and we've been making this big push about getting stakeholders in system development involved all throughout the life cycle. And so when you talk about the shared responsibility model, that really resonates with me. So can you explain a little bit more about the shared responsibility model to our viewers who may not be familiar?
Absolutely. So, we mentioned earlier there's the infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service, and each of those are tied different responsibilities that a cloud service provider would be responsible for. There's ones that are strictly whoever's using the cloud will be responsible for, and there's a set that's shared. And that line moves between which model you're at. And then with all these other services that have come about, talking about SOC as a service, identity management as a service, it's really, really tricky. And this is something that is part of your due diligence. You have to understand what you're going to do, what are you responsible for. So it involves a lot of discussion with your providers. That's a big decision and a part of your acquisition right now.
Okay. And you also, I was looking through my notes on your recent paper. You talk a lot about reduced visibility and control as being being more of a threat or being more of a problem in cloud environments. I was wondering if you could expand on that for us.
Sure. So like when we're talking about on-premise, you like to think of that as I have all the control. It's my IT staff. They're trained to operate my network. They should know what is out there. I should have a baseline of what my system is. I should know what applications are running. I should know what versions they're running, all those things. When it gets moved to the cloud, and we're specifically talking about hybrid cloud instances, where it's not just maybe one, it's multiple cloud providers, as well as continuing to maintain your on-premise assets and capabilities. That's where we worry about having problems here. I think this is where we need to have some assistance. I know, Dale, you'll help me out here, finish this off.
Yeah, it's actually something I've dealt with doing cloud migrations before. Sometimes it's not necessarily reduced visibility, it's a changed visibility, right? A lot of people like to build their own custom monitoring solutions and their own custom loggers and stuff like that. The problem is, those are likely not compatible with the cloud, right? They have some really great monitoring stuff out there, but if you don't hook into it, if you don't know it's there, it's one of them things that, unfortunately, AWS or Azure or Google or any of them are not going to change their infrastructure to suit your logging requirements. You are going to have to change your monitoring and how you collect and parse logs in order to operate in the cloud.
Yeah, and that's one thing, like it's part of your due diligence is figuring out, well, my strategy is this now. When I'm going to go to this hybrid environment, it changes, and this is where it changes. And I could spend almost all my time just trying to keep up with the changes that the big three cloud providers are doing to take more into that. It's kind of like, when it used to be DOS and then Windows started bringing in all these extra features. Well, that's what these cloud providers are doing. So it's a combination of understanding and keeping people up to date with those services now from your cloud providers, and where do I get that information I need to provide that security? And then you tie in third-party apps that also can do that. So it's a pretty complex issue that it takes some time to think about.
I love that you mentioned the fact of how things change in the cloud. I would say of every cloud migration challenge I've ever faced, and I've done some for some pretty big companies, it's always been that uncertainty. Things change. The only constant in the cloud is change, right? So if you don't really change your culture and change your engineering practices to be able to accommodate change with the logging and the monitoring, you don't do your due diligence there, you will have problems. I really love that you brought that up.
Wow, very cool.
So we have a question from one of our viewers. Stephen asks, could one of the speakers address specific considerations for command and control in a cloud environment? I don't know if either of you two have worked extensively on command and control systems.
I have not.
Oh, I have. So yeah, there's a lot of different issues in terms of that, and I think we have the good fortune of dealing with both DoD and the agencies in these type of respects. I think that's one that you really have to look at the architecture, because you're starting to get into understanding the workflows. So specifically for like military operations, it all starts out with some type of tasking order, and figuring out, you as an architect, you need to figure out how that workflow would go. What systems are impacted? So a lot of my time is spent doing a context diagram, doing different systems, who's talking to who, which commands are talking to who, and then you can start to look down to figure out, well, what do I really need in terms of capability and assets? Do I have to worry about edge computing? Do I have to worry about, do I want to have a really big cluster? Am I going to distribute this over multiple cloud locations and things like that? So there's a lot to think about in that, and that's something that we can follow up with. If you'd like to reach out again, we can provide a little bit more assistance in that area.
Great, thanks. And I do want to let everyone know that we've been talking about the 2 tech notes that your team published this week. Those are available on the SEI website in our digital library. The easiest way to find them is to search on Tim's name. That's Tim Morrow, Morrow. But we'll try to include links to those assets with the archive version of the webinar when we release that, I believe, tomorrow. I wanted to just pop back with a quick observation. Dale, you made the interesting point about the difference between building your own, growing your own custom monitoring solution to dealing with the large commercial providers and the logging solutions that they already have available and how they are not going to bend. And that's from coming out of a defense acquisition background. And I know Tim's probably nodding his head on this too. That has been a shift that a lot of programs have had to deal with. There were some pendulum shifts about lots of things being custom because then you have control. And really shifting towards leveraging the commercial capabilities to the greatest extent possible. So that's an interesting piece that from a program management perspective, I think often might merit more consideration to make sure that it's not just right. It's not just procuring the capabilities or procuring the services to migrate and deliver capability in the cloud, but also understanding how you are going to be, what the licensing is and how you're going to be delivering the monitoring capability associated with the operational capability.
Right. So I think a key word here maybe is trust. It's very hard. You're putting your trust in these providers now, and you're relying on them to provide the services you need. And I know a lot of our programs, it's tough even for them to work together. That trust is really hard because you have to meet your schedule. But that's part of the shift in your thinking that you have to do. It's not that I need to worry about the security of their stuff. It's more I need to worry about maintaining my stuff securely. That's my responsibility. And I know we've published Gartner has a report out we identify in the paper where they've identified like 90-some% of the problems in the cloud is a consumer, the user's problem. It's not the service providers. So that's a big mindset that you have to think about changing.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I would say that matches my personal experience. Typically, the consumer problem is that, like we said, they're trying to get the cloud to bend to them. But just as a side note, and I'll say I felt the pain of having my bits eaten by something in the cloud. But all of the cloud solutions, especially for monitoring and all that stuff that I've ran into, are really good. Mm-hmm. They're typically much better than what a single customer, no matter how big you are. I know I've done work for some Fortune 20 companies, and this has happened to them. Stuff that they built that they thought was really good gets replaced by the cloud. But that stuff in the cloud is really good. It gets, they benefit from economies of scale that no matter how big you are, you just will not have.
Right, I think that's the thing that we talk about, especially when we work with smaller organizations and agencies. If you could take advantage of software as a service features, you're saving yourself a ton of time, effort on your staff. It just makes your life easier because, it's not just you trying to make that application work. Somebody's already done that for you. So that's part of the trusting too, is some things are better left for other people. There's things that you're good at. You focus on that, you let them do that. And that's one of the advantages of the cloud there.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I'll even take that a little bit further and say, probably as much as 95% of the time, the custom configuration that you think you need is just that, something you think you need. You usually don't.
Okay. I had a couple of questions written down here that I wanted to try to circle back to. Tim, when we talked about, so we had this great talk about monitoring and logging. Tim, I wanted to ask a little bit about failures. When we're talking about cybersecurity, what are most failures really associated with? And we talked a little bit about the user right? On the user end of that shared responsibility model. Can you tell me a little bit about where you're seeing most failures occurring?
Right. So that's one thing. So I have my cheat sheets here. I'll let you guys know that because our papers are really handy. So I highlighted him. Doesn't come off the top of my head. But there's 3 challenges, like dealing with protecting your data. I think that's what we're trying to get by that question is, I need to worry about preventing unauthorized access to my data. I need to make sure that I can get at my data no matter what happens to that system. I need to understand how that system works and what will happen if I have a failure there. Business continuity, disaster recovery type of stuff. And the last thing is, accidental deleting of that information. That's something that things happen to the cloud service provider. Those are the 3 areas that we focus on. So those are part of the things that you need to think about as you're going through and developing your system and planning for your system is, we talk about identity and access control. That's very key. It's one of the best practices we talk about from our experiences here is, being able to understand what people's roles are, who can do what, and then implement that. That's what this cloud service provider provides those services to make that easy for you. But it takes time for you to do all that part from for your system. A lot of times when it's on premise, oh, Joe does that, and Harry always did this. It's not that way. When you go up there, it's like you have to put your big boy pants on, and you have to really do what you say you're doing. So I think that's one aspect. I don't know if you wanted to anything to build on that one, Dale.
That was big boy pants. That was really well said. I don't think I can add anything.
Okay, sounds real good.
That was really good, honestly.
You're very kind. So I think maybe I'll just expand it and give it a little bit more in those areas then. So I think one thing, and I don't know if we'll get to this later, but you have to understand where your data is. So it's not just how you get access to it or making sure that you understand how the cloud service provider is. But once you get that data up there, you got to understand what system you've implemented, where that data is going to reside at. Because that was something that was an eye-opener. And I think we have a really good picture in our best practices paper about once you put data up there, they're going to back it up. They're going to mirror it. You're going to do that type of stuff. If you've got a content delivery system, they're going to have a copy of your data there. So we give examples of sometimes if an organization went up and they did some medical information and they want to take it off, you can't be really sure unless you really know how your cloud service provider implements that all that data is gone. They could have a failure in a disk drive. They could do a number of different things. You have to really know how things are implemented. And I think that's a big change from my on-premise where I could just go yank that hard drive and smash it. And I know for certain, again, it's coming back to trust.
Yeah, because a lot of times in the cloud, it's so easy to push your data to 3 or 4 different data centers. I mean, why wouldn't you? It's easy to back up, but I guess people don't think about deleting it, right?
Right, what really happens.
And it's not just your data, there can be stuff in your logs too. Just like, it's not just backing up your database, you have to make sure your logs are clean if there's sensitive information in there too.
Right, that's the thing. And it kind of comes back, we haven't talked much about identity and access management, but there's a key points from the cybersecurity point of view is, it's one thing, okay, I've identified my data I need to do my monitoring, and I have these logs, but if I don't have the right access control for those logs, somebody else might come in and wipe out my logs. There's all kind of possibilities from that. So it all goes back to due diligence. We like to say that a bit too much, but it's very important to get this planning and figuring out how your life cycle, how that system's going to work. How do you envision that? And then how do you want to be done with it? I think another thing we kind of talk about here is moving. When we talk hybrid cloud, we want to do multiple clouds, right? The idea is, maybe this week Google's going to have a sale on their CPUs. I'm going to want to switch over. That doesn't happen. I mean, from your point of view, that really doesn't happen. And I don't know if you've had experience trying to port between cloud providers or not.
Yeah, I've had some interesting issues, like specifically I built a loan management application that I spun up on Google Cloud. It was running. It was a Kubernetes app, and I was able to spin it up on Google Cloud in 5 minutes. When we ported over to Amazon, because they switched providers, because Amazon had a lot of stuff that Google didn't, it was 2.5 weeks. So even though just because something will run on 2 different cloud platforms doesn't mean they're equivalent on 2 different cloud platforms.
Right.
So really talking about strategically, going back to that first point about strategically focusing on what are your real needs, and is there a trade space in which you might want to consider migrating to a different cloud at some point as a risk mitigation strategy, or for some other reason, but having some cognizance of how important that is going to be to you when you're making those. Effectively, we're talking about architecture and design trade-offs up front, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think there's one thing I would note on that, if you do want to move things around, just the extreme importance of prototyping. Like one thing we found out that we planned this and planned it. One thing we found out at the very last minute was, well, in Google, you can only get a level 4 firewall. They didn't have level 7 firewall, so we couldn't get our ingress stuff working right. Mm-hmm. So no matter how well you plan it in the cloud and how well you think you can move things over, you need to prototype it.
Absolutely. That's one thing. It is, all these big cloud service providers. So when we do our work, we focus on the 3, AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud, because they document, and it makes it easy to understand and at least get a sense for those type of things. But you said they'll have same capabilities, but how to implement them is very different, in some cases. Yeah. And I think maybe that's another subject we can kind of touch on is, how does that impact your IT staff? Because now it's one thing if I'm on premise and I know all my stuff, but if I move one thing up to the cloud and they do it one way, and then I want to move something else up to the cloud and their services are a little bit different, now we've opened a real can of worms here for our staff. And I think that's something, I don't know if you've had much in that experience.
Yeah, for some reason, this is probably more an industry problem than a DoD, but a lot of times, management thinks, if I move everything to the cloud, I can get rid of some IT resources.
Right.
If I can't think of a less true statement than that. The thing is, if you don't train your staff to use the cloud, because things are going to be different. It's not the same stuff up there. And training is unbelievably important. And to think that you're going to reduce your IT headcount by moving to the cloud is just a fallacy.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and that's, maybe that didn't come out clearly as part of our failures, but this is very, very important because you need different talents. That's the other thing. Because now I'm looking at APIs and figuring out how to get the data from there rather than just a log file. And just trying to understand, well, if I make this change or I spin up a different capability, and that's something we'll also talk about. It's more, now infrastructure is a code. So that's why earlier we mentioned configuration management. I don't know if you've experienced more of this, but I think this is where we're starting to tie into the DevOps, secure DevOps type of world. Yeah. So I didn't know, do you get to do with that much of that right now?
Yeah, I tell you, a properly configured DevOps environment is such a beautiful thing. I'm working, the project that I'm working on now is very much tied into secure DevOps processes that go from end to end, and there's something just really beautiful about creating a container. I'll give for instance. I had an app that was sending some emails, and we were having problems because we were trying to send too many emails on the within this web service, right? Mm-hmm. So you do what any sane person does: you spin up a service broker, RabbitMQ, real quick, spin it over there, and you spin up a couple services doing to process your emails. Doing that on-prem, and I've done this on-prem before, is a several week ordeal, right? Because you got to order servers, you got to figure out where you're going to put this. I literally did this in 3 hours, right? I was able to spin up a new service broker. I was able to create services that would consume the stuff and send emails. And that sounds like a great story, but what people don't understand is what it took to get a system in place that could do that, right?
Right.
And if you don't have people that really understand that pipeline from beginning to end and really understand how to take advantage of, just like I said, this these rapid provisioning of a pool of resources, that's where you have to get that advantage.
Right, and then from a cybersecurity point of view, it's a little bit different. You know, to baseline your network and understand what you have out there it took more than what it does in the cloud. In the cloud, I can do like CloudForm. I can put out what I want that system, and they have it, and you treat it now like source code. So I do configuration management on that. And from a security point of view, that's great because I can take a snapshot and I can look in that and see if there's any changes. And so this is how things are different from, you know, your security, your IT staffing. You have to think about things a little bit different how you do their job.
Yeah, well, and it does create some interesting security issues too, right? Like I was saying, I spun up the RabbitMQ instances of my services without ever talking to a platform person. I did this in code, I checked it in, and it happened, right?
Right.
All of a sudden, I have this stuff in my testing environment, it's in my production environment. So I think a particular security challenge when you're talking about DevOps processes is how do you make sure I didn't spin up something I shouldn't have as a developer?
Absolutely. Gets back to roles and responsibilities. That's what that is. Yeah. Are you the right person to do that? Am I okay with you doing that? That's a part of, you know, doing the right job.
And you can mitigate a lot of that by forcing people to use like hardened containers and stuff, but it's just something to think about.
Absolutely.
The fact that it's so easy makes it also so easy to, even inadvertently, do the wrong thing.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly.
Or do a wrong thing, I should say. Let's move over to a few questions that have come in from our viewers, if you don't mind. A few minutes ago, Dale, you talked about working on a project where moving from one commercial cloud provider to another presented some challenges because those services operated differently. And so in the acquisition world, we talk a lot about vendor lock, right? Like being locked long term into a non-competitive situation or a single a single contractor. Cheryl asks, what do you feel the impacts of vendor lock have been in the DoD environment if we've got experiences of this type with our DoD or even our federal customers in the cloud space? Have we had those?
Well, I think it's interesting. When I shared that story, I'm not sure you could classify a 2.5 week migration as vendor lock.
No, but if you scale it up to, we were talking about embedded platforms earlier, right, for example, on those development environments.
Yeah, so I think it's a different type of vendor lock, right? Traditionally in the DoD, you'd have vendor lock where you had a single vendor who was only able to edit a certain piece of code. You've almost got more of a knowledge lock now, where it's not so much that I am tied into a particular vendor. If I'm using smart cloud technologies, I say that you can use some things that are definitely vendor specific, like certain forms of function as a service, but I don't want to get sidetracked on that. But the thing now is not so much that I'm locked into this particular cloud vendor. It's, do I have the expertise to and the knowledge to move things off of one cloud vendor to another? I know not that I have an exemplar memory, but I have a difficult time just trying to memorize. If I typically use all 3 clouds every week, I have a hard time just remembering the different CLI commands to do the exact same thing in each one. So I think it's more of a knowledge lock than a vendor lock. Would you agree with that, Tim?
It is that, and I think the other thing is the cost associated with it, because all these providers, it's cheaper to put that data in there than to get it out. You know, they have a lot of mechanisms that allow me to put that data up there or have that capability. But if I want to move that to somebody else, or if you're taking advantage of their SaaS offerings, it's awful hard to figure out what kind of data do I need to get out to go put it in these different cloud providers. So I think there's a lot of cost consideration, as well as dealing with some of the business continuity, disaster recovery, things like that. It's just really confusing. It takes a lot of effort. You're going to have that knowledge, that training to understand what you're getting yourself into and how to do that type of stuff. So the lock-in is a little bit different than what we start out from a DoD point of view.
Okay, I really appreciate those insights. Let's move along. Neil asks us about FedRAMP. How important are FedRAMP certifications for providers? Are we seeing programs agencies or programs really insisting on these certifications?
Oh, yeah, that is. And I mean, that's a big push with the agencies and things like that. The idea makes a lot of sense. You know, if you go on the list, I haven't looked at the FedRAMP list. It was about 100 some last year when I looked at that. And that number keeps going up. But then the thing that we watch with that is we like to say the big three are the ones that you should think about and follow their guidance on trying to do that. So FedRAMP's really good about identifying security controls that you need to put in place to get your ATO, authority to operate. And the idea of FedRAMP is that if one agency does it on this platform with this type of capability, another agency should be able to use that information, tailor it to theirs, and quickly come up to speed. That doesn't quite work as well as they'd hoped there. But FedRAMP is really good because it's raised the bar. You know, you don't get to change service level agreements, but now they have information to help people, acquiring organizations, to what does that mean to you now? I can't dictate that, so how do I have to change my acquisition and how I want to do, run my program based on that? So FedRAMP's been a really good thing for agencies to start on. It's just not the whole answer yet. And that's part of the reason why we exist. We help people do this stuff and understand that, make some pilots and help show them what to do there. So I don't know, did you have any? You didn't have any FedRAMP?
No.
Gotcha.
Sorry.
Oh, no.
We all work with a whole lot of different programs and agencies, so don't apologize.
No. But next week you might have that opportunity.
Yeah, that's
We'll
true.
say that.
That's true.
That's true. There's never a typical day, and if you don't like what you're doing today, right, there's going to be some new problem or new opportunity.
If you don't like what
next
you're
week.
doing, wait 5 minutes.
Yes. And a question from Doug. How will the Cloud Smart strategy impact your future work?
I think that's good. I got my notes here. So Cloud Smart, they're focusing on for successful cloud adoption. They're saying they have 3 key pillars. It's security, procurement, and workforce. So to me, looking at their stuff, it makes sense what they're saying. I think when I look at our best practices paper and from our experience, a lot of the same things are being said in this Cloud Smart, but it's more the implementation. What does that really mean? So it's one thing to have somebody tell me I should do all these things, right? I should have a framework and I should identify all my workflow. But how do you actually do that? That's the part that I think we find challenging. And again, this is why we exist and FFRDCs exist, is to help people understand, well, what does that mean and how do I implement that? So for me, I'm very excited. This is the first new information dealing with cloud since the Cloud First and DoD's initial effort. These are around 2011.
Yeah, that was a long time ago.
Oh yeah. So people have been kind of wondering, and it's been sad to see some of the failures that we've had to work with on that. So this is really good. They have identified key areas in those things. I think it maps well with our paper, but I know there's a lot more work that we need to do to help organizations understand what their intent is. It's not just move everything to the cloud. No, you move it with a purpose. Again, we kind of call it due diligence, but there's some things that work better in the cloud, some are better left on your premise. Some things are just running on an old mainframe. It's not worth porting or doing that type of stuff. And so you're doing your own risk assessment and trade-offs to understand what it is, what smartly goes to the cloud. That's the strategy. And so we're going to work to help understand the intent and how to implement that for our customers.
Well said.
Oh, thank you.
We had a question from Greg about, so you were talking about, lost my train of thought there, but Greg asks, do you have any opinions or thoughts on agencies that are implementing on-prem clouds like Amazon Snowball or Snowpack, and whatever, and other examples that exist? But
do you have experience?
I mean, I've worked with a couple people doing GovCloud. I think they're great. In a lot of environments, that's kind of really the only choice you have for certain to comply with regulations.
right,
However, though I've found most of the GovCloud stuff I did is it doesn't really have the full power of the big cloud providers. I mean, it's the same stuff, but it's not a complete copy of all their services, right? It's kind of a watered down
right.
version of it. However, I would much rather have a watered down version than no version at all. You can do a ton of stuff in there, right?
Right. So the Snowball is a way to get data quickly into their system. That's the mechanism they do that. So that's a part of an architecting effort. Some situations we run into, I can't just connect to the internet, pump my data over to the cloud and be happy with that.
Right.
I have to use a Snowball approach. They're pretty cool. I think AWS, when they'll back up their tractor trailer and help you transport that data. But it's an architecture issue that you need to evaluate. How do you do your missions? What's important to you? And is that the right answer? Maybe there are other alternatives, but that's something you need to consider as an organization, a part of your transition.
Okay. I don't think we have any more questions currently from our online viewers. So just at a high level, for anybody who might be tuning in late, do they still say tune in now that now that none of us have the rabbit ears anymore and we're all streaming all of our content? But we had a really good conversation today that we launched from three main themes, right? Getting a better appreciation of the planning needed to really transition assets and capabilities into cloud only or cloud or hybrid cloud environments. Important differences in cybersecurity implementation in cloud environments, and really the importance of the appropriate kinds of training for an organization's IT staff, knowing that you're managing talent that has to address different kinds of problems and different kinds of challenges. Dale and Tim, I'll ask you now for, I guess, some final thoughts on, is there anything that you really wanted to talk about today that we haven't gotten to? Anything important that you want to share with our viewers?
I'll go first, sure.
Yeah.
So I like this. So we're saying, from our experience, if you're going to go to the cloud, your ultimate responsibility deals with identity and access management, configuration management, monitoring log analysis, and data security. So we've talked a bit about most of those types of things, right? We talked about data security, about knowing where your data is, your concerns about how you access that data, who accesses that data. We've talked about monitoring log analysis quite a bit, so I think we did a good job there. Configuration management ties into how you use the cloud and how you set up your infrastructure. Identity and access management, we touched on the roles, but some of the considerations that we haven't talked about is, how to do that. On-prem, you can have identity, Active Directory or something like that. When I go to the cloud, I can use the cloud providers in terms of that. But how do they mesh together in a hybrid environment? Do I want to use Active Directory in the cloud? Yeah, most of those cloud service providers, they all provide that capability. But these are all new security concerns that you need to think about. There are different possible attacks that you can use because you have these different configurations. So I think that's one thing I think people need to think about is your attack surfaces is very different now when you have this hybrid cloud computing environment. And I think those are the things that we try to discuss about in our approaches and techniques, is to help people understand the context, what they're trying to do, and then you look at those systems, you look at your capabilities, you look at your interfaces and try to figure out what are your risks there? I think that's what, no one's going to tell you those answers. Everyone's unique, so that's what I'm going to leave you with. You have to think about that type of stuff.
Thanks.
The only thing I would add is that something we didn't really touch on at all is that if you really want to do a successful cloud migration, I would very much recommend doing it in small chunks. I think I've really never seen a successful cloud migration that consisted of a bunch of upfront planning and then trying to move everything over. I think the cloud moves way too fast to do something like that. And so your plan is going to be irrelevant by the time you're done planning it. And two, especially with places that don't have enough experience, you need to break a small chunk of your system off, prototype it, get it working end to end in the cloud in a production environment, and use those learnings to inform the rest of your cloud migration. I think if I had a single piece of advice to give people, it would be that. If you don't do that, you're going to have problems.
Right. There's a number of, and that's one thing, you're right, building on that is, there's a number of cloud adoption frameworks. And that's one thing we recommend in the paper that I forgot about is, whether you're for specific CSP, or if there's one agnostic, you want to do multi-cloud. But there are a number of frameworks out there, and they help you figure out what's a good path to go, making sure you're checking off in the box what it is. But ultimately, you have to pilot and try things on your own and get that experience.
Because one thing I can promise you from doing, I don't know how many cloud migrations or how many cloud apps I've built at this point, is it never works in the cloud the way you think it will.
No plan survives first contact with the enemy with the cloud, right?
It's true. It's very, very true. Like, for instance, the firewall story, everyone just said, oh, we have a firewall. It's very rare that somebody would have thought ahead to think, oh, is that a level 7 firewall? There's just things like that just always seem to happen.
So just like we talk about fast learning cycles in software development, we're talking about fast learning cycles in prototyping and experimentation and avoiding those big batches in cloud migration.
Exactly.
Well, do you two think we can squeeze in one more question? I think we have time. One more question from a viewer. Stephen asks us, are there best practices for deciding what types of workflows are best suited for cloud, on-prem, hybrid, edge deployments? Do you have any thoughts on that? I just rattled off a big list.
Wow. I hope that we could do 12 webinars on that, I think.
Right. I think that's some experience. This is sometimes where it's good to bring in outside consultants on that, because each one's a little bit different. If you understand your mission, you understand where your data, your assets are, what capabilities you're trying to do, it's a real good idea to bring somebody in that's done it before to talk with you and to help you make those decisions. Now, I can't give you a best practice of what should go here or there. We can give you ideas or recommendations, but I think this is when time to call in a consultant to help you a little bit. I think it would be well worth the time and the money on that one.
And at the risk of sounding like a broken record, if you're asking these types of questions, start building prototypes today.
Yep.
Start building prototypes that you know you are going to throw away. Though a prototype that'll take you a week to build will save you months of asking questions.
Absolutely. So maybe one thing we could add in, so one of the exciting things that we've done recently is we talked about secure DevOps. We've talked about architecture. Recently, we've worked with customers to go from that top-level picture of a system-to-system architecture. How do I decompose my architecture down into a design? And then how do I translate that into, say, like DevOps, like SAFe? And what does that really mean? We're getting more and more of our customers are asking us how to do that to actually have a flow. And it seems to be a new model. So we've got to pilot that once, and it's very informative because you have to talk to people at all different levels. So for me, going forward, this is one of the areas of excitement I'm looking into is trying to be able to convey and get people that vision to not understand just their system, but then how do I develop it using the process.
Okay, great. And Tim, so the two papers that, the two tech notes that your team released this week are on risks, threats, and vulnerabilities, and on best practices in cybersecurity for cloud, right?
Yeah.
Okay, we will make the links to those tech notes available in the resources when we release the archive of today's webinar. I've been informed, so that'll make it a lot easier for folks to access those. And I know you and I had a lot of fun recording a podcast or a series of podcasts on this topic earlier in the year as well with one of your fellow researchers. I think with that, Dale and Tim, I really want to thank you for joining me today. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I certainly hope that our viewers did as well. I think we got some great questions. And for more on these topics, again, at our Software and Cyber Solutions Symposium, September 10th and 11th, the whole theme of that event is risks and benefits of cloud computing. We have a great day with some high-powered keynotes and some great panelists. Someone from Tim's team is going to be speaking on risks in cybersecurity, and Dale is going to be giving another great talk for us. And then again, on the 11th, we have some great tutorials targeted at managers and executives about cloud migration, about risks and benefits, and about architecture for the cloud. So please consider joining us for that event. Today's event will be archived and will be available on the SCI's YouTube channel. Again, our Software and Cyber Solutions Symposium is the 10th and 11th of September, so we hope to see you there. Thanks, everybody, and have a great day.